This is the all-new Garmin Forerunner 570. It comes in two sizes here, the 42mm and the 47mm. It's one of the brightest watches that Garmin makes, and it does just about everything, meaning that it's great for swimming, for biking, for running, for triathlons, and it even has a new built-in speaker and microphone. But I say just about everything because there are some things that this watch is missing that you're gonna wanna know about. We're gonna get into that. Okay, if you are short on time and you don't want me to win the, YouTube algorithm game, here are my quick thoughts on the 570. I actually think that this watch is a great device. For me personally, this device does all the stuff and it does it extremely well. The issue I see here is the price of this device. And I think that there are some really good other options on the market right now for less, including the predecessor to this device, the Garmin Forerunner 265. I'm actually seeing it online right now for about $350. And we'll talk more about comparable devices within this video here. But once again, maybe one of Garmin's biggest competitions is Garmin. Okay, the naming conventions going on at Garmin are super odd. There was a Forerunner 205 that was released all the way back in 2003. It's kind of actually hard for me to tell how closely related that watch is to the more modern Forerunner watches. But in 2010, Garmin released the Forerunner 210. At the same time, they released the 410 and the 610, and they had already released the Garmin Forerunner 110. And it's here when we started to see this bit of a pattern that the 200 series, it wasn't going to be the cheapest Garmin watch, but it obviously wasn't meant to be their top of the line watch either. In 2013, Garmin released the 220 and the 620, and you would think that they would go and do the 230, but you're wrong. Garmin made the 225 in 2015. I actually think the big news here with this watch was that we finally had built-in optical heart rate sensors built right into the back of these watches. Oddly, that same year, Garmin made the Forerunner 230. So that's the 230, 235, and then they made the 630. And then the 235, 735, and 935, that was around 2016, 2017 timeframe. And then the 245, 645, 745, and 945 in that 2019 timeframe. And then the Forerunner 55, 255, 955, all of that was in 2022. And then finally the 265, 965, and 165 in about 2023 or 2024. So it seems like updates every 2 years. So if you're like me, you are probably expecting the Garmin Forerunner 275, 975, maybe a 175 equivalent. But Garmin did something odd. They released this 570 and the 970. So it's not 100% unprecedented, but it is a little bit odd. Now, I always assumed that they were going to avoid this 10-based product number because it would end up overlapping with their cycling computers. Garmin has the Edge 510, and then they went to 520, 530, and 540. I'm assuming that they'll do a 550 at some point, really any time now. But Garmin also bumped up the prices on these devices by $100. The MSRP on the 265 was $450, and this 570 is $550. But diving deeper into this new 570 model, there are two sizing options. The 47mm comes with a 1.4 inch, very bright AMOLED display. How bright? Well, Garmin doesn't exactly say, but they are saying that it's quite bright. And so I'm kind of guessing like 2000 nits or so, or about twice as bright as their previous watches. I don't actually have any problem reading this watch under bright conditions. In general, memory and pixel displays do tend to look a little bit better in direct sunlight and then not so well indoors. But I noticed that I preferred this bright, sharp AMOLED screen when I was swimming, and it's just a little bit darker and dimmer when you're trying to glance at your watch underwater. The smaller 42mm Forerunner 570 has a slightly smaller 1.2-inch AMOLED display. Here's how the 42mm 570 looks on my tiny but still very manly 165mm wrist. And here's how the smaller 42mm option looks on my wife's wrist. So I think if you can swing it, I actually do prefer the larger size as opposed to the smaller size personally. But there's also a new aluminum bezel on the 570. For the most part, I do think that this watch looks very similar to a lot of the modern Garmin watches. I guess the 570 is hiding one tiny little new secret. It has the normal 5-button design. So 3 buttons on the left, 2 on the right. There's a very subtle Forerunner label kind of stamped in between the start button and I guess it's like start or selection button and the back button. But on the bottom of this watch, there's actually something new. There's a built-in speaker here, along with a built-in microphone. So you can now use this watch for voice calling when connected to your smartphone.
Okay, this is how the audio sounds coming through the Garmin Forerunner 570. The speaker and the audio, in my opinion, hasn't been that bad. I've taken a couple of phone calls on this watch. It's definitely not a feature that I use frequently, but it's definitely nice to have if you're on the bike or you're walking and you don't want to pull out your phone.
Now, the speaker and the microphone aren't the only new things about this device when compared to the 265 from 2 years ago. There's also now a skin temperature tracking overnight, which should contribute to any sort of like wellness tracking that Garmin is doing. So it's going to enable features like past ovulation estimates for menstrual health tracking. Along with that, this watch will also provide you with heat and altitude acclimation details. So how well are you acclimating to either hotter weather or higher altitude? If you are traveling to visit your buddy Des from the Des Fit channel, way up there in the mountains in Colorado somewhere. The UI of this device has also been updated to match what's on the Fenix 8. If you have watched my review of that device, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of these UI changes, but that update also means that the Connect IQ app, which is kind of like Garmin's third-party app store, but those apps can now have 4 data fields instead of the 2 that were allowed previously. There's also a large font UI option, which is huge for those of us with eyes that are starting to get just a little bit older. There's a new focus modes, so similar to your smartphone's focus modes. And then the new UI has a new passcode and a swipe down to unlock the touchscreen if you want either of those turned on. There's also Garmin Triathlon coaching training plans and new structured multi-sport or triathlon custom workouts. So a brick workout, for example, where you might be encouraged to do a short run after you've been on the bike for a while. And then there are more sports profiles on this watch, 23 new sports modes there's some good stuff in here. There's a pool triathlon mode, which would have come in very helpful for me like a couple weeks back. There's a new rucking activity profile. Just feel free here to just pause this video if you want to look at all of the sports profiles just to see if your favorite thing is in here. But I tried to highlight the stuff that's new. There's also a new evening report that I'm still trying to figure out. I've had this watch for really like 3 or 4 weeks now. It's not that it's hard to figure out. It'll show you these evening reports or all of these metrics about an hour and a half before your scheduled bedtime, which is something that you set up to like dim the watch when you actually set up your watch originally. But by default, it'll show my day, workouts, weather, and tomorrow's events. You can also set an alarm right from here. Here's the thing, I find this a little bit annoying because the 570 is a touchscreen and I seem to be constantly accidentally selecting add an alarm right on that top screen on that evening report when I have no desire whatsoever to set an alarm for whatever time it's trying to set for the next morning. I actually tried to go into the settings to turn off the alarm option on the evening report, and it seems like you can't actually edit that specific feature. So anyway, I find it a little bit annoying. In fact, I think I'm gonna actually go ahead and turn off evening reports altogether until Garmin can at least allow me to update this alarm or remove this alarm from this particular section. Either way, to edit either of these, Garmin has the morning report and the evening report. You go into the watch's main settings area and then go under notifications and alerts, drop down to report settings, and then you can edit either the morning report or evening report. And then when you go in here, you can either turn off these reports altogether or edit what is being shown. Now, if we flip over this Garmin Forerunner 570, we can see that it has the latest and greatest, Garmin calls it their Elevate Generation 5 optical heart rate sensor. And it's a great heart rate sensor, but it typically allows the user to perform an ECG or an electrocardiogram. But in this case, on the 570, it doesn't have that feature. It's on the 970 with a very similar heart rate sensor, but not the 570. Here, if we actually look really, really closely, maybe I can get some reflections going on here. If I twist this watch a little bit, there's a slight reflective silver or metallic edge to this heart rate sensor on the 970, which the 570 doesn't appear to have. That must be part of the conductive material that's needed to perform this ECG. And I think it's too bad because this feature, not being on the 570, especially considering the price of this device, I think it's disappointing. This heart rate sensor has been pretty accurate for me. Here, if we take a look at some charts, I typically think that bike riding is it's a little bit too easy of a test, at least if we're talking about like indoor cycling where you're not hitting a lot of rough trails, or road biking like I've been doing. And then I think swimming is a little bit too hard. And I always feel like running is kind of the sweet spot for uncovering any sort of major issues with heart rate tracking on these devices. But here's the 50-mile bike ride I did. And I actually do see a few spots where it looks like the ECG style chest strap. It's in blue here. It has these dropouts where the line kind of just goes straight. But both the Forerunner 970 and the 570 look fantastic. So looking at some other heart rate data from a run here, and again, this data looks pretty good to me. Now, if you've been paying super close attention to this video, you might have seen or noticed that I've been showing the 570 and 2 different size options, but I also have 2 different color options of this large edition of the 570. The purple style, actually Garmin calls it indigo aluminum with translucent imperial purple. And then I have the standard black edition, but the larger 570 also comes in a amp yellow aluminum with translucent whitestone turquoise band, which I actually think looks pretty cool. And then the smaller 42 millimeter size, it actually comes in white with a slightly bluish tint, black, and then this really cool color that Garmin is calling raspberry aluminum with a translucent bone mango band, which, yeah, I like. But if you pick up the 570, in the box you're gonna find the watch itself, the charging cord, which is Garmin's specific 4-pin connector to USB-C, the safety and product information, and then a quick start guide here. Now, oddly, this new Garmin 570 actually has less battery life than the previous edition of this watch, the 265. I'm actually guessing that it's maybe due to the fact that it's a similar watch, similar in size. The 570 is ever so slightly larger, but they might have the same battery size built into these watches. And then this watch having a brighter AMOLED display, it appears to end up with less battery life overall. So in raise to wake mode, the 570 will go about 11 days. The 265 was 13 days. The smaller size of the 570 will go about 10 days. And the 265 was more like 15 days. So it's a pretty substantial hit to battery life here, and I definitely think that you guys should keep that in mind, especially since some of these batteries will deteriorate with age. These lithium-ion batteries, they tend to be great for about 2 years or so and then struggle after that. And then you can expect about half of the battery life if you are using this watch with its always on display turned on. And that's actually the way that I tend to wear these watches. But there's basically two ways to look at battery life. You know, wearing it as an everyday smartwatch, or how much battery life do I have during a GPS activity? Just because GPS activities do tend to be really hard on battery life. And you can go about 16 hours in the Sat IQ mode with the larger 570. Remember that the Sat IQ mode basically has the watch intelligently switch between less battery intensive all systems GPS mode and the more battery intensive dual band GPS mode, which is more accurate, but it only uses that mode when it's detecting a weak GPS signal and feels like it needs to move into that mode. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds. It's a clean, crisp GPS track and good long battery life. And actually, this is the way that I typically leave my Garmin devices when I'm swimming, biking, and running. And it's definitely the mode that I would suggest that you guys consider using, at least unless you really need the excess of battery life. So with 16 hours on a full charge, you should feel pretty good about going for most long distance running events. You're probably okay for half Ironman events. You're actually probably okay for a full Ironman event, you know, depending on your fitness levels. You have 17 hours to finish a full Ironman event. Majority of the people will finish faster than that. The smaller 570 will go about 14 hours in these modes. So keep those limitations in mind, you know, when you're choosing watches, but also when you're choosing the size of watch. Let's quickly take a look at the accuracy of the GPS on this watch, because I do want to move on and show you guys how this watch compares to a few other watches on the market. And I kept this 570 in that Sat IQ mode when testing the GPS accuracy here. And here's that 50-mile bike ride that I did recently. And if we zoom in here and we, dig around a little bit, you can see what side of the street that I was biking on, when I hopped up on the sidewalk. GPS tracks look absolutely perfect to me. Here's a trail run, basically an out and back with a little loop on the farthest spot. Again, not much to see here. As we'd expect, everything looks really good here. Okay, I really wanted to get to showing you guys how this watch compares to a few other devices on the market. And I have a few on hand. I showed this earlier, but here's the Garmin 255, 265, and now this Garmin 570. So you can kind of think of these as, about $250, $350, and $550. As I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of new things that are part of this 570. I'm just not sure that the new features are absolutely critical for the stuff that I like to do. And then next to the 570, I do also want to show you the 965 and the brand new 970. And I'm seeing the 965 for about $500 at the moment. And the 965, it doesn't have a speaker or a microphone, but it does have routable mapping and a very detailed golfing options. And then this new 970 cost $750 and has a built-in flashlight, which you probably think you don't need, but it is fantastic. And then the heart rate sensor is capable of performing that ECG. It also has a titanium bezel and a sapphire front crystal lens, which actually should help resist against any sort of scratches and things like that. But comparing this 570 to a few other watches on the market, here is the Amazfit T-Rex 3, the Suunto Race S, the Coros Pace Pro, and the Polar M3, all of which have a similarly bright AMOLED touchscreen display, and all of the other watches besides the 570 have built-in maps. Now, to be fair, I wouldn't say that these are as useful as the 965 or 970 maps, but they are there. They're built into these watches for free or for you to download, and the prices for these devices are very reasonable. The Polar Vantage M3 is about $400. The Pace Pro and the Race S are both about $350. The Amazfit T-Rex 3 is only $280. My only point is that at this point in 2025, in the current marketplace, I really wish that Garmin would have included mapping with this Forerunner 570. But wrapping things up, I do think that this is a very capable device from Garmin. I think that people who snag it are really gonna love it. I also think that the sizing and color options are really gonna be a big selling point for this very lightweight running device. But I do wish that Garmin had included ECG, and I wish that they had gone ahead and included maps with this device. You know, like I said before, I just think that any watch that's selling for over $400 at this point should have maps built in. But what do you guys think? Is the 570 something that you guys are interested in? What do you guys think about the price? Let me know in the comment section. Comment section is right below the like button and the subscribe button down below here somewhere. But either way, fancy new Garmin Forerunner watch or no watch at all, I really do hope that you guys are getting out there, swimming, biking, running, rinsing, and repeating it all over again. And we will see you on the next one.